My name's Adrian Lyons. I'm from the UK. I feel like a bit of an interloper here today, really, because some idiots in the UK decided we would leave the European Union. And, so thank you for having me. As was said, yeah, no presentation. I was in Denmark for a conference back in 1988, a very long time ago, and I remember two things from that conference in Denmark. One was, in Denmark there are more pigs than people. And the other was, somebody said, if you can't use your head, use an overhead. So I can't use an overhead, so I'm going to have to use my head. And I want to talk a bit about how, with the best intentions for trying to help disadvantaged people through enterprise and entrepreneurship and enterprise education in schools, for example, we sometimes actually make things worse, which might sound really odd. So I'm going to start my story with about 8 years ago. I should say actually that for 16 years I was one of Her Majesty's inspectors of schools with Ofsted, and I was the national lead for economics, business and enterprise, a job that doesn't exist anymore because we had a change of chief inspector and a change of ideology. And whereas in the UK we were well ahead, well, in England anyway, we were well ahead with enterprise education, that kind of came to a stop about 13 years ago, and the current government has an ideology that's really not interested in enterprise entrepreneurship in schools, which is a bit strange really with a Conservative government, but nevertheless that's the case. So we had a change of chief inspector, and the previous chief inspector said to me, look Adrian, if we take a really well performing school, one that we would judge as outstanding, then there would probably be about 70% of the pupils who would leave with what we would consider good qualifications at the age of 16. 5 A stars to C at GCSE, as was the measure in those days. What about the other 30%? What are we doing for those? So it kind of started from, what do schools do for pupils who are educationally disadvantaged? So I was asked to set up a project. We had a number of HMI, Majesty's Inspectors, visiting schools in different parts of the country. We constructed it so that each region was represented. So we got a geographical spread, different types of schools, different types of socioeconomic context. And what we found was actually quite interesting. As I said, it started off by looking at people who don't do that well in the traditional school system, but we found things as we went along which made which had implications which are much broader. And there's this quote from a pupil which really, a 16-year-old, which really made me think, because I had a habit of asking pupils, what do they wish they'd been taught in school that they hadn't been taught about in school? And the answer was nearly always the same. The answer is nearly always the same, which is money and taxes and stuff. And then one pupil, one 16-year-old boy, this was in Norfolk, which is out on the east coast of England, quite remote. He said, I think they do that in posh schools. Now, posh means, you know what posh means?
Yeah, fancy, expensive private schools.
Exactly. Yeah. And that sort of made me think, oh, that's a shame. That's interesting that that's your perspective. So, I through the project we identified a number of different forms of disadvantage. One of them is through work experience. It used to be the case in England that work experience was universal for pupils sort of between 15 and 16-year-olds, giving them 2 weeks in a business, finding out what real work was like. That kind of stopped as a universal experience. Now, about half schools do it, half don't. There's no requirement to do it. A lot of schools see it as a good thing. But what a lot of schools who do it have started doing is saying, we want you to have work experience, but we haven't got the time to organise it for everybody. So we'd like you to find your own work experience placement. And if you can't, then we'll find something for you. Well, it's absolutely great if you've got the contacts. You can have a great couple of weeks out of school, really enjoy yourself. We came across people who'd been over to work in a district attorney's office in Dallas because they had a cousin out there in Texas. But the pupils who didn't have those contacts often ended up working in the school office or something just fine, but it wasn't nearly as exciting and actually didn't really fulfill what work experience is for. So already we've got disadvantage being reinforced through something that actually, with the best of intentions, is designed to give everybody experience of the real world to make them in a better position to get a job, basically. So that's one area where actually trying to do what's best actually reinforces disadvantage. And then we found something else. We were asked to look at apprenticeships, which we're not nearly as good at in England as perhaps people are in Germany and in some other countries. It's not that well enforced. In fact, apprenticeships in England's got a bit of a bad reputation, really. It's for people who can't get on to an academic course post 16 or post 18. That would be the pinnacle, that would be what people really want to do. If they can't do that, then they can go get a trade and be an apprentice. But what we actually found was that at age 18, it is becoming a lot more popular becoming an apprentice, because it means you can actually get a degree without ending up with a lot of student debts. Great idea. At age 16, employers don't want people at age 16. They think they're too immature. So that wasn't working very well. But we also found that actually people at 16 couldn't afford to do it. So we came across pupils who'd got themselves the apprenticeship organised when they were 16, but then their families found that they would lose the benefits, and actually you couldn't afford to do it. At age 18, though, we found another issue, which is, whilst it's becoming increasingly popular to do apprenticeships, it depends where you live. So again, going back to Norfolk, for example, 18-year-olds are saying to us, well, look, if we were to do an apprenticeship, we'd have to go away. There aren't any around here. We'd have to go away. And if we're going to go away, then we'd rather be with a group of other people the same age as us, i.e. we'd rather go to university. So geographical disadvantage, it depends where you are. I don't know how much you know about the economic landscape of the United Kingdom, but the interesting thing about it is that although it's the 6th largest economy in the world, that wealth is really concentrated around London, and it doesn't stretch out much further. So whilst London area is incredibly rich, most of the country is actually pretty poor by European standards. So that's geographical disadvantage. And then finally, you'll be pleased to know, and this isn't directly from that research, but at the same time, a colleague of mine who works at the University of Manchester was doing some research that said, actually, what do we do in schools to promote enterprise and entrepreneurship education? What do we actually do? And it's competition based. It's let's do a mini enterprise where you're in competition with each other. And if you do well in that, if you win, you feel pretty good about it. That's great. But of course, by definition, and I suppose this ties into the previous sessions about capitalism, if you're not one of the winners, you're not going to feel that great about it. And actually, there hasn't been a lot of academic research into this, but Catherine's done quite a bit of academic research. Catherine Brentall's her name. And she said if anybody wants to contact her, she's really, really pleased, and I've left her contact details over there if anybody wants to follow this up. Because what I would have done is show you some slides summarising what she's found, but I could read you out chunks of text, but I won't. You can follow it up if you want to with her. But it's basically questioning whether what we do in schools to promote enterprise education and entrepreneurship is can itself reinforce disadvantage, because, again, in the English context, it tends to be the pupils who already do well in school, do well in those competitions. It tends to be when you go out of school to have inter-school competitions. It tends to be the ones from the more affluent, the more well-resourced schools that win those competitions. Again, reinforce it. Well, we know we don't go to a very good school, and this has just proved it. So I would say, in conclusion, there are, and this I am going to read, there's economic disadvantage, there's geographic disadvantage, there's curriculum disadvantage, because it depends which school you go to in England as to what your experience of enterprise education is going to be. And I guess what we're hearing in Germany, it depends which lander you go to, whether you're going to get. And what this leads to actually is, I do some work with University of Essex Economics Department, and actually their worry is that from pure academic economics, the students tend to be white, middle class, male. That's true of entries at school level for economics qualifications. It's true at undergraduate level. 70% essentially white, middle class, male. Undergraduate level, at graduate level. Therefore, at economic policy level, the civil service. And my very last thought is that, as I said, 16 years with the British Civil Service as an inspector, and last 2 years, what gives me credibility, I've been an entrepreneur. I'm now self-employed.